Yeah, we are reeling a bit from those wide receiver injuries, but let's hit the waiver wire as Week 8 gets underway. What's up, everybody? I'm Adam Azer with Dave Richard and Jamie Eisenberg. We welcome you to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Pumped to be talking to you on this Tuesday afternoon on CBS Sports Network. Guys, I'm going to start. Dave, Jamie, give me some good news. I hope. Do you have any undefeated teams still remaining?
2.
0.
Woo!
Yep.
I had one go down yesterday. The FFT Open, I was still undefeated until yesterday.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah,
I'm getting my butt kicked in my FFT Open League. Nothing like having 11 fans laughing at you for an entire football season because you've got the unluckiest team in the league.
Yeah, and if you recall, maybe after I went 3-0 in the FFT Open, I talked a lot of smack. I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'm 3-4. So lesson learned there.
Karma's a real thing.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I like I told you guys, I went up 43 points going into last night. All he had left was Lamar Jackson, and I lost. So anyway, we will talk about Lamar Jackson shortly as we talk about our Monday Night Football takeaways. But also, remember, we got a lot of waiver wire players, Juwan Jennings and Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer. We didn't really talk too much about him, but there are other Bucs wide receivers if you can't get McMillan. So we'll help you out. We'll get your wide receiver and your tight end as well. Good tight ends on the waiver wire. Let's start, though. 4 big topics. Topic number 1, Jamie Eisenberg, give me a Monday Night Football takeaway.
Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are good.
Yep, they are the best.
He's not a 2-time fantasy football analyst of the year for nothing, Adam.
I mean, the worst thing about that was the injuries. That's the biggest takeaway is Godwin and Evans leaving the game. And what do we do with Baker Mayfield moving forward?
Yeah, what do we do? I have him in so many leagues, my most rostered player. This is also probably karma there, too.
Godwin was probably my most rostered player, so I feel you.
He was one of mine.
I'm sitting him for Caleb Williams as of now. Yep. I'm sitting him for Dak Prescott, and I'm sitting him for Jared Goff and Dak Prescott in a Superflex league. So I'm going to try to sit him. Where do you guys, your early rankings, where do you have Baker Mayfield for this week against Atlanta?
He's right around 14th. It's tough to say. First off, Evans hasn't been ruled out yet, but you just anticipate him not playing, and clearly Godwin. We're going to get the news that he's out for the season. So can he rely on Jalen McMillan? Can he rely on Sterling Shepard? Obviously, the guys that you look for to step up, are the 2 that stepped up last night, and Rashad White and Cade Otton. But is that enough to keep Baker Mayfield as a top 3, top 5, top 10, top 12, fantasy quarterback for the foreseeable future? So I'm still optimistic. I think the system has been very beneficial. But when you have, a Hall of Fame receiver in Mike Evans, who is still producing at a very high level and one of the best receivers in the NFL and fantasy this year, in Godwin, to lose those guys, that's just extremely detrimental. So the matchup's not daunting in terms of the Falcons, but it's just hard to say that Baker's a slam dunk.
Okay, Dave, I'm going to talk about the other game as if it were as exciting as the margin of victory.
This might be the best acting job you'll ever do.
This was unbelievable. James Conner ran like a madman last night. And Marvin Harrison almost had 40 yards in this game, and it came down to the wire. If you didn't stay up for it, first of all, it was a very quick game. I want to thank them for that. But if you didn't stay up for it, a last-second field goal, personally, I think I would have just scored a touchdown there with the backup kicker, I think. But anyway, the Cardinals, they won. They beat the Chargers. What were your fantasy takeaways from this game?
He's not even sure who played in the game.
He didn't watch this one. There's no chance he watched this.
No, there's no. I didn't watch it live. I watched it in the morning. Listen, my first takeaway is we've got a Chargers offense that's starting to throw the football a lot more over the last couple of weeks, and it might just be a matter of time before they start to really take that as their identity. I know that's not what they came into the season doing, and I don't know if that's what they're going to do next week against the Saints. I think they'll still run the ball a lot.
Oh, they will.
But Justin Herbert in time could end up being the type of, let's keep expectations low, a bye-week replacement quarterback that can get you close to 20 points. I don't even know if he's gotten 20 points in a game yet this season, but it's coming. He threw for almost 350 against the Arizona Cardinals. So I'm kind of, my interest has been piqued by the Chargers offense over the last couple of weeks. And if you started J.K. Dobbins, I was expecting a big game from him too. I think we're going to get it against New Orleans in week 8.
Yeah, Dobbins, you look at the game log, might be a little matchup dependent, and this was not as good of a matchup as maybe we thought. But anyway, yeah, next week should get right, or this upcoming week against the Saints. All right, so let's talk about buy lows and sell highs, because this is probably the best way to improve your team. We love the waiver wire, but this is the chance to get maybe a stud at a low value. So, Dave, you want to buy low on Achane, Jamie on CJ Stroud. Dave, you can go first here.
We've been talking about buying low on Tyreek Hill for the last couple of weeks with the idea that Tua Tagovailoa coming back would be really good for Tyreek Hill and for Jalen Waddle too. And I feel like that window is closing/closed as far as buying low. But we just got a game where Achane really wasn't that great for fantasy managers, but he had the most work of the running backs in Miami. It's another matchup against Arizona. I know the Cardinals' run defense looked good against the Chargers. I'm still not buying it. And I think this entire Dolphins offense will change with Tua Tagovailoa under center. And we know what Achane's upside is. He's 25 PPR points. And so if I can get him relatively cheap, certainly not as cheap as I would have gotten him maybe 2 weeks ago, but not as expensive as he's going to cost after he has a big blow-up game in week number 8, I'm trying to do it. It's the running back I'm going after the most.
All right, Jamie, CJ Stroud.
I mean, look, he's coming off his worst game of the season, maybe the worst game of his career, and you see the way that he's struggled a little bit. And, I think part of it coincides with the run game being as successful as it has been, because the games where Joe Mixon has played, it hasn't been great for Stroud. But we know he's better than this, and we know Nico Collins coming back soon. So when you're looking at the landscape of the quarterback position, we just talked about Baker Mayfield, who is a top 2 quarterback, and how he may be untrustworthy at this point. You got Brock Purdy, who's dealing with injuries to his receiving core. It's just a position. Patrick Mahomes obviously struggling. Anthony Richardson struggling. 2 guys who were drafted as top 10 options. And so if the Stroud manager maybe has picked up someone along the way who they feel maybe more comfortable with, you might be able to trade for Stroud, or you might have somebody that you picked up off waivers that you might want to make as sort of a package deal to get CJ Stroud. Because I still think there's top 10 upside. I don't think we're going to get the top 5 quarterback that he was projected as coming into the season, but there's still the ability for him to play like the guy that we saw last year. And I think I would try to get that if you can.
Would you guys rather have CJ Stroud or Baker Mayfield the rest of the season?
Knowing what we know now about the receivers in Tampa, Stroud easily.
I'd like to know the timetable for Evans before I commit to that, but right now I'd take Stroud.
I'd also like to know the timetable for Nico Collins. We don't know for a fact that he'll be back when 4 games are up.
Right, like Evans may return before Nico does.
Yeah.
In theory.
I still think that's Stroud. Yeah, all right. All right, let's go to our sell highs here. Jamie, you're selling high on Tank Bigsby, and then Dave is just working overtime, folks. He's giving us 2 sell highs. But Jamie, talk about Tank Bigsby.
Look, he may not have the solo act for much longer. We don't know how long Travis Etienne is going to be out. And he just took advantage of a very favorable matchup against the New England Patriots. Now he's got to come back and take on a Green Bay defense that's better against the run. Not a slam dunk, knock you out, can't run against them. But you are talking about a situation where he's not involved in the passing game. And when we see these type of running backs, we know what the downside is that if they get behind and he's not on the field, I'm sure he can have a handful of catches if they need him to. But it seems like they want to either use Etienne in that role or right now Dearness Johnson in that role, who's a very sneaky waiver wire ad for this week. But in terms of what you can get for Tank Bigsby, if you could turn a starting caliber running back coming off 3 of his last 4 games where he's been very successful, 2 of them where he's been dominant, and knowing that one of those was against the Colts, one of those was against the Patriots, and turn him into something that can help you, I'd absolutely be doing that right now.
You might be able to get Bigsby and a weak quarterback for CJ Stroud.
Yep.
And now you've got Stroud on your team. You're moving on from Bigsby. I wouldn't move on from Bigsby unless I really liked my running back depth.
Sure.
That might be like 2 or 3 fantasy managers in every league. But you're right. I actually like the matchup for him against Green Bay. But I do think that there are going to be tougher times ahead for him. I've got a 2-for-1 in the sell high department, Adam, because they're both kind of the same as far as outlook goes moving forward. It's Kareem Hunt with the Chiefs and Javonte Williams with the Broncos. Both of them awesome games in week number 7. And I think they'll both have awesome games in week number 8. But after that, tough schedules ahead for both of them. In the case of Kareem Hunt, we know that Isaiah Pacheco is going to come back. And we also know that the Chiefs' schedule for the fantasy playoffs is nightmarish. The Browns are in there. The Texans are in there. The Steelers are in there. Makes me nervous to count on Kareem Hunt, especially if Pacheco is back by then. And then the same thing with Javonte Williams. The schedule after this week, Ravens, Chiefs, Falcons, Raiders. Okay, that one's awesome. And then the Browns, and then a bye. So if you can sell high on these guys, we say this all the time when it comes to sell high. It's okay to trade these guys when you're getting a lot for them, but you've got to get a lot for them. If you're not getting a lot for them, it doesn't mean that we're saying just get them off your team. They're not vegetables on your dinner plate. They're guys that can still help you win. You don't want to give them away.
Are you selling Hunt if Pacheco does not return in the regular season?
We don't know if that's going to be the case.
But if I tell you right now, Isaiah Pacheco is out until the playoffs.
I think the price tag would be a little bit higher.
Okay.
Yeah. If I would still do it, but the price tag would be higher.
Okay. All right, guys, let's finish up with the waiver wire here and talk about our top 3 priorities. Jamie, who are your top 3?
You look at the tight end, and Cade Otton's got a big opportunity here in front of him with the injuries to Mike Evans and the injury to Chris Godwin. And we saw last night 10 targets, 6 catches, 100 yards, and I think he's going to be 8+ targets. He's had a good month, and I think that's going to be something that's somewhat sustainable, maybe not to these heights, but certainly getting the opportunities to produce. And I think there's going to be a go-to guy for Baker Mayfield. You look at Tua Tagovailoa, I think he's got must-start ability right now. I was actually on the way to work. We live in South Florida. There was one of the hosts on a radio station making the case that all the people that said to Tua should retire, they just pissed him off. And now you're going to get Tua on a revenge tour. And the prediction was a 400-yard game against the Cardinals this week, which would be fun to see. We know that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have been waiting for him to come back. And then Jawan Jennings, look, the 49ers wide receiver core, we don't know what's happening. You know that Ayuk is out for the rest of the season, but Deebo Samuel dealing with pneumonia. We don't know when he will return. Jennings, you saw when there was a guy missing in week 3. It was 2, actually, in Deebo and George Kittle. He went off against the Rams, and he's got that upside. So I think he could be a number 3 receiver rest of the way as long as he's healthy.
And I agree with Jamie's top 3, Adam, but it would be boring if that's all I said. So I've got 3 more names, and they're really close behind his 3 names. It's Hunter Henry, who is going to get a lot of targets now. We've seen it now in 2 games with Drake May. The production's been good. Target volume was high last week. The reason why it might have been high last week, and Jamie talked about this on our podcast earlier this morning, is because of Demario Douglas being out. But I don't want fantasy managers to forget about Demario Douglas. He was out with an illness. He should be back this week. In the 2 games with Drake May, Douglas has a target per route run rate of at least 30%. That is supremely high. That is excellent. You saw Azer's eyebrows go up when I said that. That's a really good thing. So keep Demario Douglas in mind. And then the other name that I'll have for you is Tyler Lockett. We don't know about DK Metcalf and whether or not he'll play in week 8 or 9, but if he's out, Tyler Lockett should see an uptick in targets. He's certainly more of a downfield threat than JSN. I would be happy to have him in my lineup as a number 3 receiver, even though he's taking on Buffalo this coming matchup.
I'll be communicating with Dave through my eyebrows only for the rest of the show. So we will be right. That kind of hurts, actually. We'll be right back.
It's okay, Eugene Levy. You're good.
We'll talk about quarterbacks and running backs on the waiver wire after this. Let's get into the waiver wire. Quarterbacks and running backs here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. So, look, no teams are on bye this week. 2 teams are on a bye next week. But you might want to start planning for the future. The byes are going to come pretty heavy starting in week 10. So get ahead of the game. Maybe there's some players you want to stash. Maybe you're buying into Drake May or whatever it might be. And obviously, if you're in deeper leagues, this is a pretty good week if you're in 2 quarterback leagues. You got the Brown situation. You got Gardner Minshew getting the job back. Mason Rudolph maybe getting another start or 2. But let's take a look at Jamie's list of priorities at quarterback with Tua Tagovailoa, number 1 with a bullet. But if we put Aaron Rodgers on this list, Jamie, would you rather have Rodgers or Tua?
Tua. I think just looking at the way that the Jets offense looks right now, granted, 1 game with Davante Adams at Pittsburgh, probably not the best way to judge it, but it still looks like there's a lot of disjointed things going on right now with Rodgers and his receiving core. He's getting a little jumpy in the pocket. He's got 6 interceptions in his last 3 games. So he's not maybe the same Aaron Rodgers who knows how much he trusts his leg coming back from the Achilles injury. So I think Tua, healthy, with Tyreek, with Jalen Waddle, with those guys getting no targets in the first half of their last game, they're about to hit a huge, explosive stretch of games, and I think Tua's got a higher ceiling right now.
One of the best parts about it is this matchups up ahead for him. So we already know that he's got a great schedule or a great matchup.
Jets do too. Jets have a great schedule.
The Jets do too.
Yeah.
But I think just the fact that you could look at the Dolphins' schedule through week 11 and you'd only say, all right, that Buffalo game is going to be a little bit rough, but outside of that, should be smooth sailing. Hopefully the protection's good for Tua, and he's back doing his thing.
Yeah, the Jets schedule, I just want to highlight. The Patriots are 11th against quarterbacks, but Aaron Rodgers has already had 1 good game against them. The Texans are 28th. The Cardinals, as of last night, they were 27th, probably a little bit better, but around there. Colts are 23rd. It's actually a great schedule coming up for the Jets, so just keep that in mind.
Right.
And Rodgers and Tagovailoa, two more players that I would be starting over Baker Mayfield this week, and I will be starting Tua over Baker. All right, just on Drake May, 25-ish fantasy points in both of his starts in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. Before last night's game, Russell Wilson was the number one quarterback per game in fantasy. Now it's Lamar Jackson. Do you guys buy into May or Russell Wilson long-term for either of them rest of the season?
I mean, the schedule gets so brutal for Drake May coming up for the next 4 games that it's tough to say you're going to trust him. But if he has another good game this week, for example, then you'll say, okay, if he can do it against the Texans, which some of it was garbage time, if he can do it against the Jaguars, okay, take advantage of a good matchup. Now he does it against the Jets, which may have Hassan Reddick playing and, should look a little bit better. Then you say, okay, now I'm a believer. And it's going to be dependent probably on how it happens. If he's just playing in the fourth quarter and it's a blowout win for the Jets, then it's probably not sustainable. But 3 straight games of 20-plus fantasy points, 3 straight games of 24-plus fantasy points, that's hard to overlook. And so he's got the ability to make some plays with his legs. What he did last week without arguably his best receiver on the field for the majority of the time because DeMario Douglas dealing with illness, that's encouraging. So I like what I see from May. Now, in the case of Russell Wilson, you see the upside of what this offense can actually look like when they're throwing the ball to a higher level. And George Pickens looked great. Pat Freiermuth looked more involved and more productive. You saw Van Jefferson catch a touchdown. Darnell Washington was making some plays. I think that's something that could be a little bit more sustainable. They're about to hit a tough part of their stretch because they've yet to play a division game. Only team in the NFL yet to play a division game yet. But this matchup against the Giants, I think, is a little bit more favorable than May's. So I would lean Wilson over May from a 1-week situation.
I agree. And you've got the Giants this week for Wilson, and then he's got a bye after that. Are you really going to hold on to Russell Wilson through his bye? He does have the Commanders on the other side. That is another good matchup. And then comes the AFC North, and that's when I think we'll see the worst of Russell Wilson. So not a long-term commitment for Russell Wilson.
To be fair, though, the AFC North is really just the Browns matchup because the Ravens matchup has been very forgiving to opposing quarterbacks. As Baker Mayfield showed you can still make some mistakes and get a big game out of that. And the Bengals, I don't think anybody's afraid of them.
All right, and let's take a look at the running backs available on the waiver wire. And we'll take a break on fantasy. No, just kidding. The running backs, it's not a great week. Not a great week for running back here. But Jalen Warren.
You just had our whole production staff pushing buttons.
Yeah, I couldn't let it go too long there. But anyway, Jamie, take us through this pile of garbage.
Yeah, it's not great. I'll tell you what, though. I'd rather have this than what we had last week where everybody was banged up and you're trying to find replacements. At least your running backs that you have on your team are for the most part healthy. So Jalen Warren looked better last week than he did the game before. This is now 2 games removed from the knee injury, and the offense with Russell Wilson a little bit more on schedule. He'll be a little bit more involved in the passing game, and he's an injury away from being the starting running back for the Steelers, so he should be rostered. I actually put Dearness Johnson second in the column now, ahead of Tyler Goodson, just because if there is no ETN, I think we could see a situation where the Jaguars chasing points. Johnson will be more involved than Tank Bigsby in that scenario, and he did just have 12 total touches and 3 catches. Goodson was better than Trey Sermon, but we'll see if Jonathan Taylor practices this week, which is what he's hoping to do. Not an easy matchup against the Texans. Tyjae Spears is more of a long-term play than a short-term play. Justice Hill is a gamble, wild card. Kamani Vidal's a long-term play. And you see Khalil Herbert at the end of the list. He is more of, let's see if the Bears decide to make a trade. If somebody comes calling to get Khalil Herbert, Miles Sanders is another running back that you've heard rumored in some trade options, but I don't think anybody's going to be excited about him. If Herbert ends up in the right situation, whether he's the 2 on a team or potentially competing for a starting job, he could be a borderline starter in fantasy. So if you're on a deeper roster, deeper league, and you have the ability to stash him for a couple weeks through the trade deadline, I would consider doing so.
There's nothing really much else to say other than if you need a running back and these are the best options out there, you might be interested in trying to make a trade. So that's probably the best path to go if you need a running back this week.
I'm going to just spin it a little bit differently, Dave, right? I don't know if you've done your waivers yet. I did half my leagues basically before the show started. So I've got this one league where I think McMillan, maybe Juwan Jennings. It's a 3-receiver PPR league. We're all in it. It's our magazine league. And I put in some claims for a wide receiver. I don't remember who the claims were for. But on my bench, I have Blake Corum, Tyler Goodson, Zach Moss, and Tyjae Spears. And I couldn't figure out who I wanted to drop. I decided I'm going to drop Tyler Goodson. Even though he's the most likely to have any value this week, I'm not going to be starting him. And I'm hoping Jonathan Taylor is back soon. But I don't and this is for everyone out there, unless you really love someone, I don't think you should drop Blake Corum. I don't think you should drop Tajay Spears. I don't think you should necessarily drop Zach Moss. Obviously, it depends on your record. But you got to look at your handcuff and say, who has must-start potential? I don't think Tyler Goodson ever really will. So just, if you need someone this week, maybe Goodson gets another go at it. But he had 0 catches last week with Richardson. So just a thing. I don't know how you're approaching that, Dave. Like Zach Charbonnet hasn't done anything in a while,
right?
But we know what to do. What do you do with these high upside handcuffs right now?
Yeah, you try and hold on to them as long as you can, but some people are going to need wide receiver help or quarterback help, and they're going to need to drop those players. So they're players that we don't want to drop, but they are the most droppable guys. If you wanted to, you could wait until Saturday to make the drop, so that way the player definitely makes it onto the waiver wire the following week. You have a chance to go and pick them back up.
Let's talk about wide receivers and tight ends. A more exciting list here. We'll get to that after this break on Fantasy Football Today. Let's take a look at the state of the wide receiver position here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. All right, looking at CBSSports.com, PPR average draft position, 5 of the top 12 wide receivers in ADP have already missed multiple games with injuries, okay? And that is through 7 weeks. The next 7 wide receivers in ADP were Deebo Samuel, Chris Olave, Drake London, Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Smith, and DK Metcalf. You could get a few more there who are going to miss multiple weeks. It has been rough. That doesn't include the Dolphins receivers who have been terrible. Doesn't include Marvin Harrison Jr. Doesn't include CeeDee Lamb. He's been pretty disappointing. But don't worry, Juwan Jennings and Jalen McMillan are going to cure everything. Let's take a look at the waiver wire wide receivers here. But in all seriousness, this is a week where we're excited about wide receivers on the waiver wire. It doesn't have Romeo Doubs on there either. We're excited about him. Jamie, take us through it. What kind of priorities, maybe how much fab we're looking at here for some of these guys?
So you got some interesting options at play here just because we don't know when Deebo Samuel's going to return. We don't know when Mike Evans is going to return. We don't know when DK Metcalf's going to return. So if you're just looking at maybe the safest option, it might be Demario Douglas. That being said, if there is no Deebo, Brandon Ayuk is out for the rest of the season. So Juwan Jennings has already showed you that when he's gotten a few targets, he's been good. When he's gotten a lot of targets, he's been great. Jalen McMillan just got 8 targets in the first game that Evans and Godwin got injured, and there's so much upside in this offense if they continue to throw at the same level that they have been. Tyler Lockett's been basically 60 yards a game. He should see an uptick in targets. He should see an uptick in production. Hopefully scores for the second time this season if DK Metcalf does miss. Douglas, I wouldn't look at last week's game as an indication that something's wrong. He had an illness, wasn't able to play, only had 3 targets, 2 catches. I think he's going to be in that 9 target range that we've seen. Jalen Tolbert prior to his bye week, 3 of his last 5 games was 13.2 PPR points or more. Wicks is going to kind of just be one of these guys every other week pops up and does something hopefully productive. I like what Cedric Tillman did in his first game. 8 catches, 81 yards without Amari Cooper, and we'll see what Jameis Winston does for that offense. And then you see Mike Williams on this list, similar to Khalil Herbert. If there is a trade, he's most likely to be one of the wide receivers on the move. Whether he does something of significance or not remains to be seen because he's older, coming off an ACL tear from a year ago. But he could be gone to move to the Kansas City Chiefs, and that would be something that would certainly turn around his fantasy value.
Or even if he goes to Tampa Bay, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. I think the overarching thought from that list is that there are a lot of options out there. And because there isn't one guy that's a can't miss, I mean, no one's replacing Chris Godwin in your fantasy lineup. He was awesome. But because there are so many guys that kind of have a pathway to be maybe a good number 3 fantasy receiver, or maybe even a low-end number 2 receiver in full PPR like Demario Douglas, you shouldn't have to spend a lot of your fab, and you should be able to set your waivers so there's guy number 1, guy number 2, guy number 3, and we can rank them every way that we want. But even if you miss on those guys, you can find somebody else later on in the week. I mean, Cedric Tillman, impressive week. Deshaun Watson's out for the year. That passing game might actually get better. And we know Amari Cooper's not walking back through the door in Brea, Ohio. So that means that Cedric Tillman should have a great opportunity the rest of the season. He's not a bad pickup, and half your league isn't even thinking about him. It is deep at wide receiver this week.
It's also a shame that when I do the show with you guys, everybody calls me guy number 3. So thanks for bringing that up, Dave. But we didn't really talk about Josh Palmer. And I'm not Josh Palmer.
Now we're not going to talk about Josh Palmer.
No. The Bucs wide receiver, Trey Palmer. No, Trey Palmer.
Oh, Trey Palmer.
We do talk about McMillan a lot, and he is a priority, but how much of a difference is there? I actually think Trey Palmer played more snaps than McMillan yesterday.
He's certainly someone to consider. Same with Sterling Shepard. All three of these guys now have an opportunity. It's almost like what we had when both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp went down. Remember, it was, should it be Demarcus Robinson? Should it be Tyler Johnson? It eventually, became Jordan Whittington as someone who was a big part of what the offense was doing. And so I think that's what they're going to look at until we get Evans back on the field, which hopefully will happen soon. We know Godwin most likely out for the season. But in the case of what the Bucs have right now, I think you look at Achane as the biggest benefactor. You look at Rachaad White, and then it's kind of the receiver being the dart throw. And for me, I'm going to take a chance on the guy who I think has more upside, and I think that's McMillan. So while Palmer may play more snaps because he's probably a better blocker, probably understands the things that he has to do as a veteran who's been there, as opposed to McMillan, who's still in his rookie season, I still think that when McMillan's on the field, this is a guy that Baker Mayfield's going to look at. So Palmer's going to have some moments. I think Shepard's going to have some moments. He might be the best one, to be honest with you, just because of the role that he might play in terms of replacing Godwin. But again, you're looking for upside here, and the upside for me is McMillan.
All right. And if we're looking just at both positions, wide receiver and tight end, and you're looking at Cade Otton versus these wide receivers, Jamie, who's the top priority?
It's Otton by a long stretch. Again, there's a lot of ifs with the receivers. If Debo plays, impacts Jennings. If Evans comes back in a week or two, impacts McMillan. If Cade Otton, is going to be productive as we saw when both guys were there. Now you're taking one guy off the field, maybe two guys off the field. 10 targets, 6 catches, 100 yards. Ravens have been bad against tight ends. Okay, take that into account. But Baker Mayfield's been playing very well, and I think this is going to be a guy that he trusts, especially with Godwin now not occupying the middle of the field. So he's my favorite of the entire list of guys that we've talked about that are readily available, 65% or less.
I'll take it a step further. I think Hunter Henry is the second best, and I would put Hunter Henry, if he's available and Otton's not, or if you can't get your clappies on Otton first, he's the guy you should go after as the second one off the list. And there are also interesting flex plays. You don't have to go and grab them and then just say, oh, I already have a tight end, I don't need these guys. You might want to use them as a flex in the upcoming weeks. And we've seen it now with Hunter Henry, 2 games with Drake May. The numbers have been really good, better with May than they were with Brissett. And that's saying something because Brissett does have a tendency to lean on his tight end. There could be a couple of dud games when Demario Douglas is back and he's rolling and he's going to see more targets. But Hunter Henry is being involved near the red zone. That's good. Or I should say in the red zone and near the end zone. That's good. And obviously over the course of the whole season now with Drake May, 2 games for what it's worth, he's getting targets, and he's going to continue to, because I think the Patriots, I almost think the identities of both the Patriots offense and the Bucs offense might be changing a little bit because of what's happening. The Bucs might become a more run-heavy team. Think of it. They've got 3 great running backs, and I think that the Patriots, with Drake May under center, might be throwing more. And I think it just leads to both these tight ends mattering in fantasy football.
Yeah. No, I agree with that last part. I mean, the Patriots will throw the ball more. Hunter Henry should matter. He's almost 30 years old. We've fallen for him. Fell for him last year. We fell for him after week 2 this year. I know it's different, but he only had 5 targets in the first game he played with Drake May on 33 pass attempts, and Demario Douglas obviously had 9 targets in that game. Douglas barely played in week 7. So while I don't disagree about Henry being a priority at tight end, I would rather, unless I'm completely desperate at tight end, I don't know how many people are at this point, I would rather put in a claim for Jawan Jennings or Jalen McMillan or Demario Douglas for sure over Hunter Henry. So that's where I disagree with you, Dave. I would say Otton above the wide receivers, then a few of those wide receivers, then Hunter Henry for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think honestly, it comes down to what you need and what the makeup of your team is. And you said how many people could use a tight end. I don't know, man. I feel like at least a third of every league could use a reliable tight end. And again, if they can't get Otton, Henry makes sense. But if a team's been waylaid with injuries at wide receiver, they're not even thinking about tight ends. They're going after the wide receivers.
It felt that way about tight end earlier in the year, but it seems a lot better right now.
Well, I mean, Ingram 2 weeks ago, great game. Yeah. Njoku last week, great game. You saw some moments prior to last week from Kyle Pitts. Hopefully Laporta maybe benefits with the Jameson Williams expected absence. So the position is feeling a little bit better. Brock Bowers has now elevated himself to potentially number one guy. McBride sort of reestablished himself as a go-to option for the Cardinals. So the position is getting deeper. But to Dave's point, there's a Dalton Kincaid manager. There's a Laporta manager. There is a Mark Andrews roller coaster manager that would like to have somebody like Hunter Henry playing at the level that he's at. It's just a matter of, can he come through these next stretch of games at the same level that you saw these past two games. One was against the Texans in that comeback effort. I think it was the last touchdown that May threw in that game in the fourth quarter. And then the other one was against Jacksonville, which the week before couldn't stop Cole Kmet. So just take that into account.
Okay. And don't forget about Taysom Hill, by the way. If he plays, he's still someone who can fall into the end. All right, we're going to come back, and who has more is coming up. You've been waiting for it. Probably not, but I've been waiting for it. We'll have that after this on FFT. It is time for America's 23rd favorite fantasy football game show. Although, to be honest with you, I don't remember what it was last week, but I feel like we're
31. You climbed up.
All right, yeah, we'll keep making progress here. It is time for Who Has More on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Apologies to Dave. He suggested that we do the entire show, an hour long of Who Has More. I said, Dave, we should just keep it to one segment, so that's all we're getting. Earlier, I was going to do an impromptu Who Has More when we were talking about selling high on Tank Bigsby. Who has more targets, Tank Bigsby or Jared Goff? The answer is Bigsby 2-1. So just keep that in mind. Not getting a lot of targets if you want to think about selling Tank Bigsby.
Or starting Goff as a receiver in PPR.
Yeah, that too. With that said, here's an easy one for you. Who has more touchdown catches, Trey McBride or Jared Goff?
Jared Goff.
I think it's Goff.
It is Goff. It is Goff. And we should talk about McBride. He's tight end 4 per game in full PPR. But is he really all he's cracked up to be? What do you guys think about Trey McBride? As we have enticing options on the waiver wire here, not to say to drop him, but maybe to start over him.
So last night's game was a little disappointing. He did have 5 catches, was involved. The 2 previous games, though, was really what you looked at with Trey McBride. I always thought he was more of a PPR option than a non-and-half PPR type of guy, because last year he only scored 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns on the season. 2 of them came with Kyler Murray in the last 6 games that he played. So I was hoping for some more touchdown regression for him. That being said, it's not like Brock Bowers is scoring a lot of touchdowns. It's not like Travis Kelce is scoring a lot of touchdowns. The position has not exactly been touchdown dependent for the guys at the top. It's been because of the volume and the amount of targets and catches that they've been getting. And think about some of the guys that we just talked about. Cade Otton, 6 catches, 100 yards. Not exactly going to be a consistent touchdown scorer. Hunter Henry has scored 2 touchdowns has found the end zone 2 games ago. Can he be a consistent touchdown scorer? So the position I don't think is dependent on just these guys finding and falling into the end zone. It's been because the volume has been there for some of these guys. And for me, McBride is someone that's still going to get that volume. So top 5 tight end rest of the way, I'm not worried about his lack of scores.
According to what I'm looking at, he's 6th in non-PPR points per game. That's according to the metrics that we use in our database. That was surprising to me. I thought he'd be a lot lower than that amongst tight ends.
Well, he did have 1 touchdown. He fell on a fumble. I don't know if that counts.
Depends on your league scoring. Right.
Yeah. All right. Next up. Who has more receiving yards, Brock Bowers or CeeDee Lamb?
Bowers.
Bowers has played 1 more game than Lamb, so I would say that Bowers has more than Lamb.
It is Brock Bowers by 10 yards, and Brock Bowers has 102 more receiving yards than the next tight end, George Kittle. All right, we'll move on here. Who has more catches? Brock Bowers, remember him, or Wan'Dale Robinson?
I'd be surprised if it's Wan'Dale, so I'll say Bowers.
I'll take Wan'Dale.
Ooh, Dave with the points. It is Brock Bowers, 47-43.
Those catches are not stopping, by the way. We know that Gardner Minshew, we saw it last year in Indianapolis. He loves to target one guy, and it's somebody who's inside of 15 yards. And it was Pittman last year. It's why Michael Pittman was such a stud in fantasy. And now this year it's going to be Brock Bowers.
Yeah, but you guys are just not moving off of Wan'Dale Robinson, I feel. Maybe I've just been wrong about it.
He had a terrible yardage game but he did have 6 catches. It's 4 straight games with 8+ targets. He's still going to be involved. So PPR, it's hard to overlook those 12 points which he should be able to get when things are going right. And let's not forget, Adam, they're on the road. As long as Daniel Jones is not at home, all the Giants will be better.
Okay, maybe. Who has more 25 fantasy point games in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues? Russell Wilson or Kyler Murray?
Russell Wilson. I'm sorry, Kyler Murray. I was meant to say Kyler.
It's Kyler.
Yeah.
It's
I thought you were going
2-1.
to say C.J. Stroud or Russell Wilson.
Oh, that's probably a tie. I was trying to avoid tie.
I think it's a tie.
Jamie, if Kyler Murray had gotten you 3 more points, he would have beaten me in the magazine league yesterday, but he didn't. So how are you feeling about Kyler? Yeah, totally. How you feeling about Kyler Murray right now?
I think when his 2 best games lately, he had a 50-yard touchdown run against the 49ers, and he ran for over 50 yards and a touchdown against the Chargers. He needs to do that. He's just not throwing the ball to a very high level. That's what I was kind of hoping for, was that the passing numbers would supplement the run game, not sort of offset the run game for him. So we've talked about this on our podcast today about Marvin Harrison Jr. being a little disappointing. I think there's still a lot to love about Kyler moving forward, but I do need to see him throw the ball a little bit better while also running to probably 30 to 40 yards on a consistent basis.
And Adam, you were right. It is a tie between Stroud and Russell Wilson for a number of games with 25+ fantasy points in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. Russ has the higher game of the two, and he's only played the one.
All right, let's go probably a little faster here on the rest of these. Who has more yards per target? Keon Coleman or Brian Thomas Jr.?
I'll say Coleman.
I'll say Coleman too.
You guys are correct. It is Coleman. Very impressive. 12.1 yards per target.
Right. So this is why I'm not in love with that stat, because when you think about Keon Coleman as a fantasy receiver, you think, oh, this is a guy who really, he has a good game here or there. With Brian Thomas Jr., he's been outstanding when he's had the opportunities, and that he's got huge upside to finish as a top 15 receiver every single week. So the yards per target, it's nice for Coleman, but it doesn't change my stance on him versus somebody like Brian Thomas Jr.
Oh, I wasn't trying to do that. But Keon Coleman, by the way, I believe Amari Cooper played 18 snaps, and Keon Coleman did not have a single target with Amari Cooper on the field. Who has
also
more
told him where to go on the touchdown catch?
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
Who has more targets in their last 3 games? Not 3 weeks, last 3 games.
Okay.
Not that it matters for these two. Darius Slayton or Jamar Chase? More targets in their last 3 games.
Wow, so Slayton, I believe, was like 11, 11, and 2 or something like that.
Yeah. This sounds like an A's or too good.
I'm going to say Chase.
I'll say Slayton.
It has to be. All right, Jamie said Chase.
Yeah.
Dave said Slayton. Dave wins again. It is Darius Slayton, 25-24. Dave, in 5 seconds, are you worried about the targets for Jamar Chase?
No, because he's still going to be a primary option in that Cincinnati offense, and I think Cincinnati will start throwing a lot more.
Rapid fire for these last two. Who has more rushing yards in their last 3 games? Jalen Hurts or Brock Purdy?
Purdy.
Hurts.
Purdy for Jamie. Way to go. You are back in the game. You're down by 1, I believe. And last one. Who has more Academy Awards for Best Actor? Tom Hanks or Daniel Day-Lewis?
I'll say Daniel Day-Lewis.
Tom Hanks.
It is Daniel Day-Lewis. He is the record holder. 3-2
Who didn't
for
know
Daniel
that?
Day-Lewis.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jamie,
come
how did
on.
you not know? Come
Terrible.
on.
Also-
Your family's in that business.
Terrible.
Amazing.
Ridiculous.
Just,
Daniel Day-Lewis also averaged more yards per target. Tom Hanks. We're going to take a break. We've got your tweets, your fantasy football waiver wire questions, and a controversial trade when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. We are vetoing trades right now on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. And holy cow, a league trade just got vetoed. Tyreek Hill for Bucky Irving. Was that trade fair? What do you think, fellas? Would you have vetoed this one?
can't stand vetoing. If these are 2 consenting fantasy managers who agreed to this deal, it should be allowed to stand. That doesn't mean that it's not fair, though. I'd rather have Hill.
A month ago, it would have made sense. Right now, no.
No, you got. I'd veto this, I think.
Do you think it's collusion? That's the only reason to send a trade back.
All right, maybe I'd let it stand. Yeah, okay, I'd let it stand. I want to veto it, but I think you're right. What if it were Sean Tucker? Would you veto that?
But it's not.
I know, I'm just saying, what's the line? What if two consenting adults trade Tyreek Hill for Sean Tucker?
Then they're consenting adults.
All right, now, there's got to be a line somewhere. Yeah, but I thought that's what Dave said, but then I was like, I don't think that's what Dave said.
It is what I said. Right, they agreed to the trade.
Yeah, they are consenting adults.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
I don't know where your mind is. My mind's on fantasy football.
Maybe drag my mind into the gutter. Let's read some more tweets with some waiver wire ad drop questions. As the Swift manager, should Roschon Johnson be a priority?
I wouldn't say he's a priority, but he's more of a luxury. So if you have an open roster spot and you want to carry Roschon Johnson, it's not a bad move. But if the idea would be Roschon Johnson or Jaylen Warren, for example, I'd rather have Jaylen Warren with the idea of maybe I get two starters with Swift and the Steelers guy as opposed to just carrying both Bears running backs. But it's not a bad idea to carry your handcuff if you can afford to roster both.
As you get closer to the playoffs, it's a better idea to carry the handcuff. But for now, you don't have to.
All right, next up. Oh, boy. No. Wrong.
Isn't that your CeeDee Lamb buddy?
Caleb Skaggs? He's my CeeDee Lamb buddy?
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
What way?
Isn't he the one that always says CeeDee Lamb's the best receiver in football?
Well, Marvin Harrison is not the best receiver in football. He didn't look great. A couple of the targets that Kyler threw to him were way over his head. There needs to be a correction in how the Cardinals use him. And until then, I don't think he's droppable. I would pick him up and put him on my bench, but I wouldn't start him either.
All right, let's see our next one. Would you drop Laporta for Achane?
If that's the only player you can drop, then yes, I would. But I would like to carry both if possible.
Okay. Sneaky. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's going to win the MVP. But Jared Goff is playing so damn well right now. I just want to give him a shout out. He might be second. Okay, from Devin. In a Superflex PPR league, would you prioritize Russell Wilson or Juwan Jennings? Russell
Wilson is not close.
And not even close. We went through the receivers and just how many of them were that could be potentially helpful. We did not do that with quarterbacks. And when you're in a Superflex league, there's almost never any quarterback. How is Russell Wilson even available in your Superflex league, Devin? No, absolutely. Put him at the top of the list.
That's a good question, but in a 10-team Superflex league, I play in a 10-team Superflex league. I'm pretty sure he was available up until last week.
You also dropped Caleb Williams.
I did drop Caleb Williams in that league,
yeah,
but I picked up
Dalton. That was a good move.
Okay, next up. I just lost Mike Evans. Who should I use my waiver claim on? Tolbert, Coleman, Tillman, or McMillman?
Tolbert's at the top of the list for me. I would chase the upside with McMillan next, and then Tillman, and then Coleman.
I would take McMillan first, just with the chance that he's the guy for Tampa Bay.
All right, next up from Jaquan, are we sleeping on Jatavian Sanders?
No. He's in the conversation to be added, but this Panthers team could look a lot different. And if they decide to go back to Bryce Young, then almost everybody is hands off. But if they keep Andy Dalton as a starter and they trade Deontay Johnson, or maybe as Dave said, trade Adam Thielen, then Sanders can continue to build on what he started to do the last couple of weeks. He was the only player who showed up last week against Washington, and so hopefully that's a sign of things to come.
And if you're in a league with a bunch of smart managers, maybe Cade Otton and Hunter Henry are already rostered. Jatavian Sanders would be the number one priority at tight end.
I'm just going to read one more real quick. Jennings, Pearsall, or McMillan?
Jennings would be first. I think I'd probably take Pearsall or McMillan.
Fun show today. Thank you all very much. If you need more help, please check out the Fantasy Football Today podcast. We have a new episode dropping every single day. You can subscribe to that anywhere you listen to podcasts. We are back tomorrow, noon Eastern, on CBS Sports Network, and Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network. On Wednesday's show, you'll hear from Robert Urban. He'll give you all this great running back analysis and much more. And by the way, he's killing it in our FFT. On Friday's show, we'll help you set your lineup. For Dave and Jamie, I'm Adam Azer. Thanks so much for watching. Good luck on the waiver wire, and go win your league. We'll talk to you tomorrow.